American public opinion is so frenetic that it's sometimes tough being a pollster in America, trying to give the important conversations their due consideration. Interest in the Nashville shooting, for instance, has almost completely evaporated in the time it took to get our second set of questions into the field. But unfortunately, here we sit one day after an event which, as you'll see, makes these numbers relevant again. The previous video on the topic will be linked at the end of this one on YouTube in case you missed it. Asked of 971 U.S. likely voters between March 30th and April 3rd, roughly 1 week after the Nashville shooting, which is more to blame for mass shootings in America? 42% of voters say mental health, and only 29% say access to firearms, though access is often the foot that legislators lead off with when it comes time to virtue signal in the press. 6% of voters blame family problems, 7% blame school problems, 11% social media, and 5% aren't sure. The headline here is that voters are increasingly seeing these shootings as social or mental health problems, a combined 66%, 2/3 of them. That is 2 points higher than it was in May of last year, less than a year ago, and the access to firearms response is down 1 point since then as well. Now, we will look at the internal changes year over year, but let's look at the demographics of the new numbers first. Here's age, and 18 to 39-year-olds are least likely to say it's an issue of access to firearms, only 24% of them. They're also least likely to say it's a mental health issue, but that's still the response that they choose by a plurality. But what is fascinating to me is that they put the biggest stock of any of the ages in family, school, and social media being influencers. Another fascinating point is that middle-aged voters have the biggest spread between mental health and access to firearms, 18%. Here are the party numbers, and a majority of Republicans, 54%, and a plurality of independents, 41%, say that mental health is most to blame. Also important to note is that very few Republicans think it's an access to firearms issue. In fact, it's social media that takes second place among Republicans. A plurality of Democrats say access to firearms, but that only leads mental health among Democrats 43% to 33%. And again, we go to Biden approval for the biggest signal. Biden's strong approvers, by nearly a 3-to-1 margin, say that this is an issue of access and not mental health. Only 21% of Biden's strong approvers say it's a mental health issue, but a whopping 58% say access to firearms. Also, the somewhats, which are normally pretty close together, are completely divided on this one. Biden somewhat approves also, by a considerable margin, think it's an access to firearms issue, whereas a plurality of the somewhat disapproves and a strong majority of the strongly disapproves say mental health, and only 6% of the strongly disapproves say access to firearms. As an FYI, these numbers here are even more divided than those in the political ideology columns. Isn't it crazy that if you tell me whether you approve or disapprove of Biden, I can probably guess pretty accurately whether you blame guns or mental health for mass shootings? I'd love to hear your reactions about that in the comments. Here are the demographics where access to firearms and mental health had the biggest gains and losses in a year. And look at that very first line. Democrats are 8 points more likely to say that shootings are a mental health issue than last year. And if you look at the column on the right, they're also 8 points less likely to say it's an issue of access to firearms. Biden somewhat approves, graduate degree educated voters, and upper income earners round out the top of the list of those now more likely to say shootings are a mental health issue. Moderates somewhat disapproves, and those who didn't complete high school are less likely to say mental health than last year. Voters with graduate degrees, liberals, upper income earners, and Democrats also top the list of those less likely to say access to firearms is most to blame. But here's the headline getter. The FBI supposedly has in its possession a manifesto written by the Nashville shooter. American voters want it released. 68% of them, in fact, a huge majority. Only 17% of them say no. The results among gender, age, race, and even party, believe it or not, are really close. Here's party, and although Republicans want to see the manifesto released 78% to 13%, Democrats are actually the next most likely to say yes, 66% of them, and only 17% of Democrats say no. But for another fascinating signal, I really hope our friend Rich Barris sees this one. Look at the numbers by Biden approval. Everybody, again, says yes, but one of these things is not like the others. That's pretty crazy. It's almost like a test to identify opinionated people. What I also thought was pretty fascinating is that voters who said that access to firearms were the primary cause of mass shootings were the least likely of anyone to want the manifesto released, though 52% of them still said yes. How likely is it that the recent attack on a Christian school in Nashville will inspire similar copycat attacks on Christian schools? 67% of voters say it's at least somewhat likely, 32% of whom say very likely. Only 20% say not likely, and only 2% of them say not at all likely. And 12% weren't sure. Now, the crosstabs were pretty crazy here, with a number of voters at least somewhat agreeing being incredibly stable across all demographics. Black voters were among the least likely to strongly agree at 23%, and conservatives among the most likely to strongly agree, but that was only 42%. But basically, what this is saying is that it's very clear to voters they mostly recognize the fact that Christian schools specifically represent a target. Keep in mind from our previous work that nearly half of all voters, and a strong plurality, think it's a good idea to train and arm teachers. Do you have any additional questions you want us to ask in light of yesterday's news out of Louisville, Kentucky? Drop them in the YouTube comments. And what I would especially like to know is if you've seen any polls by other pollsters that you want me to examine. I heard there was one by Fox News people might not like. But before I close, I want you to know why we started focusing on YouTube. We have a great Twitter following, and despite perhaps a little bit of throttling, our content gets out. We have a website and a mailing list, but Google isn't much of a help there. We're the only company polling Biden approval daily, for instance, and we barely make it to the top 10 on page ranking. However, on YouTube, if our videos get good engagement, we can be seen by tons of new people, and that helps us get the truth about public opinion heard. Just 2 weeks ago, we had a video go viral to the tune of 200,000 views in one day, and it was an Emerald Robinson interview about, get this, election fraud in Arizona. I think that's just rich. Now, you can help us get these videos to go viral by clicking the bell icon for notifications, leaving a like on the video, commenting, and especially subscribing, which costs you nothing but a button click. But it's one of the main ways YouTube figures out which videos to show. So we appreciate your help, and thanks for watching.